Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator.
How are you this evening, sir?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
We are busy boiling in one of the hottest days of the year so far.
This weather is knocking us off for sixes everywhere.
Climate change is hitting us properly on this end. Properly. Good evening to everyone joining. Thank you for being here this evening. As usual, if you want to contribute or raise a point or ask a question, please do raise your hands. Now, there is a feature within Zoom that allows you to push the button and I see your hand raised. If you raise your hand to the camera, I may not see you. The team are looking, but the more people that come on board, I may not see the image that shows you raising your hand. But if you press the option to raise your hand on Zoom, then it means that it pops up right on the screen in front of me and we'll be able to get to you. Thank you once again for joining. So let me start from Africa this week. Quite a few interesting developments. We had the Africa Climate Summit in Kenya. It'll be good to hear your views on that. And there's a particular area that I want to touch on. But I also know that there have been a few developments in Nigeria as well. Do you want to comment on that first, sir?
Well, to avoid being accused of hypocrisy, in the sense of ignoring the beam in one's eye and picking on the specks in other people's areas of concern. I would just like to make a few comments on the judgment delivered by the Presidential Tribunal. In my life, I have never had to go through a 13-hour to sit through a 13-hour judgment. And when I say sit through, I mean really sit through, because I didn't want to miss a comma or a semicolon or a paragraph. It didn't do any wonders for my back at my age, but I kind of felt, well, that's a sacrifice I have to make. I think that Nigeria should take pride in what happened, in the sense that we are still following the Constitution. The Constitution provides for judicial resolution of disagreements, of conflicts, of differences of opinion. In the case of Kenya, it provides for just one, straight to the Supreme Court. In the case of Nigeria, it's provided for a two-stage approach. a tribunal set up at the Court of Appeal level, and finally access to the Supreme Court for people who may still feel aggrieved after judgment delivered by the tribunal. So we are sticking to the Constitution, and given the intensity of feelings, I think we deserve to congratulate ourselves that there is no resort to street democracy or street protests. We've accepted the Constitution, and we've gone to the judicial route. For the victors, there should be moderation in celebration, remembering that there is still appeal, avenue of appeal, and that there is still the possibility that must be kept in mind that the Supreme Court may take a totally different view. So those who have lost at the level of the tribunal, again, there should be moderation in their feeling of disappointment, since there is still an avenue open to them to go to the Supreme Court and air their grievances. Africa should also derive a lesson from this, that we can, whatever the conflict may be, the judicial route is still the acceptable route. Even after the Supreme Court might have given its judgment, there may still be room for disagreement. After all, the Supreme Court is made up of human beings. Justice Oputa said that the judgment of the Supreme Court is infallible because there is no appeal against it. Not that it is wisdom at the highest level, but at the level of human beings, and given the provisions in the Constitution, that is the highest level. The only thing then left is to appeal to God, and that is when we then get before him at different stages. So I congratulate Nigerians that so far, so good. And as I said, I appeal to the victors for moderation in celebration, and for those who still feel aggrieved, moderation in their grief, because they still have one more room, one more step, one more opportunity. It will be provided for them, or is being provided for them, to air their views. So we can now go. We've addressed the beam in our own eyes. We can now go and peck at the whatever it in the eyes of others.
We are still staying with Africa, though. The African Climate Summit caught my attention, and I thought that it would be good to hear your take on that conference. Again, Kenya seems to be rising in terms of her position in Africa in terms of elections were run. Yes, they had some issues. They overcame them. Their president seems to be saying some of the right things in some of the places they're going. And now we have this climate summit that took place in Kenya. But one of the areas that caught my attention was the call for investment from, I would say, the West. And my question to you is this, can Africa truly survive by improving our trade, improving other things without depending on money from the West? Because even for climate change, we're talking about give us money, give us money. And somehow the money comes in, but through corruption, it goes. What is your take about that aspect of the climate summit in Kenya, sir?
Well, actually, there are several takeaways, as we put in the local language from that conference. Again, the conference caught me by surprise, and I don't know why. It fell below my radar. I didn't know that an African summit on climate change was being planned. When I now look at the list of attendees, it looks more like an East African belt summit rather than an African continental summit. Maybe that's why it fell under one's radar. Whether that approach of making it a localized summit rather than an African summit, whether it should not have been made as an agenda item at the last, incidentally, Nairobi conference that was just held, I think, about a month ago. I don't know why it's been localized. I know that East African Horn Belt is suffering a lot from climate change. But so also is West Africa. We in Nigeria, people in Ghana are suffering from considerable flooding. So it's not only lack of rain that constitutes climate change headache, but the opposite, flooding, is also part of, climate issues that should be addressed. Anyway, that's one takeaway. The second one, which you alluded to, and which I derive pleasure in addressing or in expanding upon, is Kenya has gone through the same thing we are going through here. It has had a contentious election results marked by massive demonstrations on the street. It's had the government and the opposition has still refused to accept the result of the election, even after the ruling of the Supreme Court. The government are taking some steps in terms of taxation, which has led to persistent and at times violent demonstrations on major streets of Kenya, no, and where the police and at times the army had to be called out. In spite of all of that, as you rightly said, the president has remained focused on playing a major role on foreign affairs. He has dispatched troops to be part of the East African military initiative to bring peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He had offered the United Nations a detachment of 1,000 Kenya police to be part of the UN initiative in Haiti. He hosted the mid-term African Union summit just a month ago or so. And now he's hosted an African summit on climate change. Now, well, unless again this is below the radar, I'm not hearing Kenyans, the foreign policy elite in Kenya, screaming at the top of their lungs about their president not focusing on on domestic agenda. I haven't heard them criticizing his emergence as a leader, an African leader on global issues. I haven't heard them complaining about Kenya not having enough resources or that is wasting the resources, blah, 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 and so on. The kind of things that the marketing of Nigeria that goes on. And some of this demarketing is being done surprisingly by people who built up a career in the foreign policy, in the foreign service, and in the foreign policy, market in Nigeria. I'm shocked. I'm surprised. The localization of what I would call, the localization of views coming from surprising sources in Nigeria. And perhaps one just needs to continue to draw their attention to what's happening in other countries. I feel sorry for whoever is president of this country, even though they've said we shouldn't be sorry for them because they sought the office, they ran for the office, and therefore, getting punches thrown at them comes along with, comes along, with the seat. But at times, you wonder, and yet the same people turn around and, belly about Nigeria not being taken seriously, Nigeria, being ignored, Nigeria. I mean, when you read some of the remarks on bricks by professors from the universities and so on, you just say, make up your mind. When Buhari and Jonathan kind of turned their back on global affairs, you complained. Now you have somebody who is there whose mantra is Nigeria is back. You are complaining that he shouldn't forget that he needs to put his house in order. Well, the Kenya president needs to put Kenya's house in order. That hasn't stopped him from, and to what looks like, popular acclaim. Now his emergence as an African leader of some repute. So that's my second takeaway. The third takeaway is again the issue you've raised where about our turning again to the West for economic resources on this climate issue. But then there is method in the madness. There is sense in that because we are victims of something we didn't do. It is the industrialized countries, the global north, through consumption of resources, of materials on a global scale, and whose refusal to be serious about their commitment to addressing global change, who are creating the problems for us in Africa. There. So really, we shouldn't be paying for addressing these climate change issues. They should be paid. And you could see the kind of things they come up with. I remember watching an interview with John Kerry, who is special representative of the US president on climate change. He was asked a question about why America is not being serious about fulfilling pledges. And he simply said, well, I'm not involved in American workers losing jobs just in order to address climate change. But he expects other countries to make the sacrifices that needs to be made. They then come up with things like we will buy carbon credits and so on, which are, look, the market women, how much charcoal do they really use compared with the massive charcoal guzzling factories in the industrialized world? The whole of the charcoal businesses in cooking in Africa, does the will aggregate to say one factory that is belching smoke into the atmosphere in, say, still producing industry in the West. So if we're going to be serious about this, then resources must be allocated. And what I praise is the offer of I'm not good at remembering figures, so but it's some $1 billion, some $1 billion offer by the African Development Bank, AFDB, over 23 years. That Additional has put, President Additional of the African Development Bank has put on the table to help Africa to cope with or to come up with programs that will help it address climate change. When you see the decimation of the husbandry in East Africa, and whole families, whole communities having to move, and in the process, in the trekking through the desert, families and wives are lost and buried, children die and are buried, and still there doesn't seem to be any on the horizon. You cannot see a solution coming. Then you have to praise at least the initiative of having an African summit, and I hope that actually that will be a way to go in terms of address, so that by the time they then go to the Doha in December, there will be an African agenda, and it will not be each African country going there with its own agenda. There will be an African agenda to be put on the table. That is the best way to extract maximum gains from the international conference that is going to be held.
You referred to something there, sir, that I want to drill into a little bit. You think that collecting or getting some support from the West, who has done what they've done to us, would be ideal. But then there's some people I talk to, sir, and what they say is we have a tendency in Africa to play the victim, and that maybe at some point we should start to accept that some bad was done to us, and we understand that, but we've got to take our own destiny into our own hands and look for local institutions, local initiatives that people are getting involved in, that they local funding can support to grow. So we're building our own local infrastructures without necessarily waiting for this kind of support from external countries. Foreign direct investment is important, but when you are faced with local industries that you can support, what would you say to someone like that, sir?
Well, I think the embedded in your language is actually the falsity in the conceptualization of the problem. You said people are saying, okay, yes, we've been dealt a bad hand in the past, but there is no but. They are still dealing us bad hands. Have the French left us alone? Have they? Have the French allowed us to evolve our own leaders who will address issues? Will the CIA leave us alone? It's only, I mean, from my point of view as a former foreign minister, I regard it's only yesterday that they were dealing with Thomas Sankara, isn't it? It's only yesterday that they were dealing with Kwame Nkrumah. And it's only yesterday that they dealt with Gaddafi in Libya, only yesterday. And I never, until you see something pictorial, you may not even at my level, and I call myself a scholar, maybe I should stop doing that. it was when Gabon happened, and I saw that picture from Morocco all the way down through the Sahel, down to Gabon, and then going to Central Africa, that I then realized that Nigeria and Ghana are just English-speaking islands in a sea of French-speaking African states. So even as, if you like, even if Nigeria and Ghana are to be regarded as islands of progress, of, Africanity, my God, we are just islands. The whole Red Sea of French influence, of French control is still there. So we haven't been left alone. So to that extent, even when you get Africans, entrepreneurs, young people, IT geeks, and so on, who are coming up with original solution that will be of maximum benefit to Africa, there are external factors that will not allow you to grow, that will not pick on those initiatives, make them grow to the benefit of Africans. Even if they want, even if you get leaders who want to do that. One of the things I worry about Ruto, about the president of Kenya, is that he's stepping into the shoes of Thomas Sankara. He's stepping into the shoes of Gaddafi. He's stepping into the shoes of Kwame Nkrumah. He should watch his back. He should watch his back, because there are still foreign factors out there. Industrialists, businessmen who are making profits from exploitation of Africa, who are making profits from, if you like, ensuring that young African, geeks do not emerge to interfere with the profits that they are making. And they are not sleeping. They are not sleeping at all.
Thank you, sir. Let me go to, actually, before I do that, I can see some comments here. I think this is Senator Bodeola Jumoke. Bearing in mind that majority of us indeed have no other country other than Nigeria, I align myself with the appeals of Professor Bolaji Akinyemi to the parties following the 12 hours of the Presidential Tribunal judgment for moderation. We should all look for takeaway lessons to guide us in our future political odyssey. Another person here says, Peter Osanbi, I share the view that either side of the divide should behave in moderation, bearing in mind that there is opportunity at the appeal and even Supreme Court. Fundamentally, we should watch our utterances so as not to ridicule the judiciary. So I think people are agreeing with your comments on there, sir. But moving on to the G20, something that struck me there was one, the fact that international media referred to India as a declining democracy. And just last week, I think it was, or the week before, we were talking about India landing on the moon. We're seeing a lot of progress being made. And do you share that view, sir, that India is a declining democracy?
I learned a new word last week, uh, which brought a smile on my lips because I think it's a concept that we've been battling with on this platform, but what I've been battling with in my brain, and I think finally it clicked, and people refer to autocratization, autocratization of the world. In other words, it's no longer the question of democracy or dictatorship, but that you could have autocracy within democracy. This is democracy where, yes, you win majority of elections, but you don't care about the rights of minorities. And that's what they meant by India being a declining democracy. Progress that's made in the world is made not by turning a majority into an uncaring majority, but progress is made by the majority caring for the interests of the minority, that the minority have rights, and you cannot use the fact that you won an election, that you have the majority on your side, and therefore you can oppress the minority. We in the global south should bear in mind that actually, if the global north were to use the fact that they had the majority on their side, we will never have got independence. Slavery probably will never have been ended. But that it was the recognition that minorities have rights and that those rights must be defended. Those rights must be protected. The differences amongst communities should not be exploited by government simply because you have a monopoly of the powers. But remember that there is no government, and definitely there's no movement that has a monopoly of violence. What we are seeing in India, and I'm old enough to remember the time of Pandit Nehru, the Gandhis, where India enjoyed a level of democracy that was the envy of the world. And yet now that same India, we are now seeing what I will call a Hinduization of India. and I've said it on this platform a few times, there are parts of India where even the power of the central government cannot be exercised because of the violence going on between the Hindus and the Muslims. I think the people who look at what is happening in India today will not recognize the India of Nehru, or even the India of Rajiv Gandhi, or the India of Indira Gandhi, for that matter. So I think that's what they mean by declining democracy. The Hindus still win a majority of the elections, even though there are now accusations of the suppression of Muslim votes in areas where the Muslims have majority, that the suppression of their votes at election time. Democracy should never translate into autocracy. It shouldn't.
Thank you, sir. But still on the G20, some have questioned the relevance and the value that we get from organizations like that. Only last week, we were talking about BRICS Plus and the formation of BRICS Plus and other geopolitical groups like that that have been set up, G7, G20. But we've seen Nigeria come out somewhat very good from the news that we're hearing of a potential $14 billion worth of investment. But this seems to be deals that were struck on the sidelines, not necessarily deals that were as a result of even attending or being part of the G20 group itself. So how relevant is the G20, G7 to global affairs and global politics? Are they losing value like some have said, or are we likely to see more groups emerging for the benefits of the regions they serve?
Well, I think for the avoidance of doubt, let me emphasize that we are not a member of G20. We've been invited by India exercising its right as the host to invite states, to invite nations as observers to be on the sideline. We are not members. In a way, we are paying a terrible price for two things, or for three things, although all the three are encapsulated in what one would simply call bad leadership or ineffective leadership for about 16 years or so. We turned our back on foreign affairs. We turned our back on global affairs. That's number one. We dived into the abyss of corruption that allowed the Commonwealth to be looted, especially our oil resources. But figures are now coming out that even the mineral resources had been exploited by foreigners with the connivance of local chiefs, some of the governors, who simply for pittance allowed our gold, our magnesium, our diamond to be, Nigeria is being left full of holes, while the foreigners, the the Indians, the Lebanese, the Chinese, the Arabs are cutting away our solid minerals. Now, if you put together those two, oil stolen, solid minerals stolen, it's a miracle that Nigeria has not collapsed. It is a miracle. But the good news is, it's like, I mean, if you leave the tap running, your tank will continue to be emptied. Close the tap and the tank will now start filling up. So as I've often, the term I use is, we're not a banana republic. And with a determined leadership, and honest leadership, committed to plugging the holes in our economy, honestly, within 1 year, I think that Nigeria will be economically, will be back. So it's not just verbally being back, but economically, we will be back. And you've made reference now to the the foreign direct investments. They are pledges. So again, they are going to be dependent on the seriousness of government in implementing programs that will allow these foreign investors to come in. And there, the government has to deal with a stubborn, recalcitrant civil service. A civil service that is used, we complain about politicians, ministers, senators, lining their pockets. Believe me, it is the civil servants actually who constitute the biggest drain in terms of corruption. Because they will let the minister know that things could be arranged for him to have $50, while the permanent secretary or the director who's brought this to the attention of the minister will be walking away with $200. And of course, the foreign partners that they use to satisfy or to line the pocket of the minister walks away with probably $1,000. So how the president is going to deal with this issue of a civil service that is used to having its own way is what I don't know. But that issue has to be addressed. Implementation of the commitments policy-wise made to these foreign investors before they would then bring in their money. They will watch you. They will study the layout to make sure that at the end of the day, they are going to be able to get the returns which you promised them. And the moment they see that you cannot crack that civil service machinery, well, you've got the government has a problem on its hand. That's the first thing. What we should be paying attention to is how politics derails the economy. Or let me put it another way. The best intentions economically can get derailed by political differences. I'm not talking domestically. You'll notice that China and Russia are not going to be at this G20. Russia, understandably, because of the ICC warrant. But why is China not coming? It's just next door to India because of political differences. Because of political differences. But even if Russia is not, even if Putin is not there, Ukraine is not. Ukraine will still be the elephant in the room. How, with differences over Ukraine, are you going to get a consensus on the major economic issues, which before had been what held the G20 together? Now, you can't get all the leaders attending the conference. And it's because of political differences that they have. India and China have been fighting, if you like, what I will call, subliminal war around their boundary north of Kashmir. Is there their troops are facing each other? They have differences on their relationship with the United States. India has been moving closer to the US. China is not happy about that. They have differences of opinion on technology. China is not happy about that. And this is likely to be what is going to happen to BRICS Plus. The smaller you are, the more you can have a consensus on key issues. The larger you are, the more differences will emerge. And this to me is what is bothering me about the G20. That again, they meant well, as long as they were focused on economic issues. But the moment political considerations intervened, their utility diminished.
One key point to raise there, you talk about the differences over Ukraine, and something came to my mind. I think it was earlier on this week. The UK government, the Home Office here, chose to announce that the government will now treat the Wagner Group as a terrorist organization. And what took them this long to jump to that? And given that the UK also had similar organizations in the past, do you agree with the position of the UK government?
I'm not. Is there anybody who still worries about position of the UK government? I think I think look, it's Professor Wale Ladita, who is on this platform, who reminded me of the name of the Gawkers, that the British still use the Gawkers. So what's the difference between the Gawkers and the Wagner Group? What's the difference? So I don't know what they even intend to gain by labeling them a terrorist group now. They've already imposed sanctions. The United States has already imposed sanctions on the financial and economic sanctions on the leadership of the Wagner Group, even before their founder died. So I don't know the top up by Britain, what that brings to the table.
One last question in the 1 minute that we've got left. Some months ago, there was this accusation from the United States to South Africa that South Africa was supplying weapons to Russia, and that a ship had stopped in South Africa. And at the time, the president ordered an inquiry. They were going to look into it. Now, an independent South African panel has released a report that they found no evidence of any such claim by the US ambassador. What do you expect the next steps to be from the United States on that?
Were you expecting a different type of report? When issues that are dealing with security matters arise, a government body set up to investigate cannot be called independent. Those of us who have, served in government know that, in fact, it is the classic, it's the British, I believe, who actually developed that. Whenever they want to cover up an issue, they say a royal commission, and you can be sure what will come out of that royal commission will be precisely what the government wants to come out, and what is covered is what the government wants covered. And that's why, even though they may use retired judges or retired members, permanent secretaries who are now members of the House of Lords, they are still members of the establishment. So don't hang on to the term independent, commission, that independent panel that you then expect to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, sir. I won't take you too much over time tonight, but I will bear that in mind the next time I hear of an independent commission is being set up in whatever country of the world that I happen to be in, that when I hear that word, I should take it with a pinch of salt. But on that note, I will end the program tonight. We'll be back same time next week. And just like I said on Saturday, if you want to receive notifications about this program, please send your email address direct to me. Don't copy everyone, please. Just select me in the list as I'm the host. Select me there and send your email address to me, and I'll make sure that you are added to the mailing list on this. On that note, thank you very much, sir. We'll be back next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good night, sir.